It's been about 2 weeks since the launch of AMD's Raven Ridge APUs, and we here at HardwareCanucks have been hard at work benchmarking these guys, and the results are really fascinating considering their price. Now, before I get into the technical details, I want to quickly go over what exactly an APU is. Well, the expanded term for that is Accelerated Processing Unit. It was initially introduced with the Limnos architecture, and it has evolved through subsequent generations. And the idea behind an APU is to offer good x86 performance along with class-leading graphics capabilities. And I think Raven Ridge might finally bring the dream of APU success to a reality. Now, these Raven Ridge APUs are a slightly updated version of the Zain architecture, and while the 2000 series branding might cause a slight confusion with the 12nm Zen Plus architecture, it's not. It's just not. It's basically a first-generation Ryzen desktop CPU with Vega graphics. And if you're interested in learning more about the nuts and bolts of these new APUs, make sure to check out our Raven Ridge Explained video right over here. Plus, if you are interested in learning more about the performance and how it compares to the rest of the Ryzen series processors, including the Ryzen 5 1500X and of course the 1400, I'll leave a link to our website article in the description down below so you can check that out. These APUs are supposed to be different from previous generations, since those feature weak processing cores, and Zain has improved a lot of that. In some cases, it could be almost double the performance of previous generation Bristol Ridge APUs, and that's pretty awesome. You see, Raven Ridge is a potential avenue for entry-level users who are thinking about going through system building in several steps. Basically, they can pick up one of these new APUs that feature respectable graphics and get away with some light 1080p gaming, and they can obviously expand the performance by adding a discrete graphics card once prices start to normalize, because, you know, miners. The main reason behind this video is to actually find out how good the internal GPU is in games that people play the most, but most importantly, we're going to be focusing a little bit on x86 performance as well. I should also mention that these APUs can be easily adapted into all-in-one desktop systems as well as notebooks at a relatively affordable price point. But the ultimate question is, can you actually game on a $99 APU? Let's find out, but first, a quick message from our sponsor.
Say goodbye to cables. It's time to enjoy wireless audio with the Corsair Void RGB gaming headset. With a light and comfortable frame, low profile mic, on-headset volume control and mic mute, plus dual side illumination. Check out the Void RGB by Corsair, the perfect way to hear your game.
Let's quickly go over the specs of these Raven Ridge APUs, starting with the $170 Ryzen 5 2400G. It features 4 cores with 8 threads, comes with a base clock of 3.6 GHz with a boost up to 3.9. You may also notice that AMD has reduced the amount of L3 cache on the 2400G when compared to the Ryzen 5 1400, which by the way has been pushed to end-of-life status alongside the Ryzen 3 1200. The reduction of cache and internal memory latencies has allowed the new CPU package to achieve higher memory speeds up to 2933 MHz on dual channel kits, and even higher with overclocking. The Ryzen 3 2200G is a pretty tempting option for $99. It's a quad-core CPU without hyperthreading, yet it offers significantly higher base and boost frequencies when compared to the Ryzen 3 1200, and as mentioned earlier, it can also support memory speeds as far as 2933 MHz, so that's pretty cool. I should also mention that these APUs are replacing the 1400 and 1200 respectively and should offer more performance. Perhaps the biggest loss, and something the APUs share in common with Zen-based Athlon processors, is the lack of 16 dedicated graphics lanes for discrete GPUs. This was done to save die space, simplify manufacturing, and push towards a lower pricing structure. Now granted, today's mid-range GPUs don't really need an X16 link. Even in our testing, GTX 1080 isn't bottlenecked by PCIe 3.0 X8 interface, but the optics of it are quite poor. And now to complete the Raven Ridge APU puzzle is of course going over the Vega-based graphics processors that are integrated into their die package. They're codenamed Vega 11 and Vega 8 with respect to 2400G and 2200G, and they imply the number of Vega compute units. Vega 11 has 704 stream processors, 16 ROPs, and 44 Tesla units, which puts it about 1/5 as powerful as AMD's own Vega 56 GPU. Vega 8 is a slightly cut down version of that, and that's obvious given its $99 price tag. These GPUs can reserve up to 2 GB worth of system memory that can be set in the BIOS, but their default configuration is 512 megabytes. Now those specs might not sound like much, but in the onboard graphics realm, it's pretty impressive. Plus, given the architectural improvements of Vega over the R7 generation used in Bristol Ridge, the difference will be like night and day. Let's discuss compatibility with AIM4 motherboards. These chips should work on X370, B350, and A320 chipsets, but as you can see, the number of I/O are limited as you go down by chipset. For example, X370 provides 4 SATA and 8 PCI Gen 2 lanes, while B350 cuts that down to 2 SATA and 6 PCI Gen 2. There are also some limitations with USB 3.1 Gen 1 and Gen 2 connectivity, but if you think about it, pairing these new APUs with a B350 or A320 motherboards makes a lot more sense as they give you the best bang for your buck. Technically, you could opt for an X370 motherboard, but in all honesty, that platform seems too overkill when paired with a Raven Ridge APU. Next up is platform cost, and this is an interesting one. So if you combine the costs of the $99 2200G and a similarly priced B350 motherboard, your memory investment is going to be closer to the combined pricing for the CPU and motherboard, which is kind of insane, especially if you plan on using a 16GB kit, which is the minimum we would run. Welcome to 2018, my friends. Okay, so like I mentioned at the beginning, this video is not going to discuss on how Raven Ridge aligns with the rest of the processors. And the reason behind that is because APU-style processors are meant to compete in a market where Intel has no competition. We really wanted to see how well these processors, particularly the one that costs $99, performs in games above everything else, because I'm sure that's why you're here. But we also wanted to do some real-world tests to see how well these APUs could deliver, respectable productivity performance, because I'm sure you'd be using this for other tasks apart from gaming. Now, for our gaming benchmarks, we also decided to throw a basic GTX 1050 to simulate a lower-end GPU scenario, and it's also a good point of reference for you guys if you're interested in comparing the performance differences. Now, unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to get our hands on with the GTX 1040, which is NVIDIA's lower-end GTX 10 series graphics cards. But as of right now, I think we're just going to stick with the GTX 1050. Our test setup involves an MSI B350 ITX motherboard, a Noctua NHS12 cooler to cool the APUs, 16GB of Corsair Vengeance LPX dual-channel DDR4 memory at 2666 MHz with these timings, and we used 2GB in BIOS for IGP partition. Alright, let's roll out those results. Starting with Adobe Media Encoder, we see the higher clock speeds are heavily utilized and they're able to deliver pretty good results. You may also notice that we did overclock the processor to see how that could affect real-world benchmarks, and the results really do speak for themselves. The lower L3 cache found on the 2400G and the 2200G doesn't really affect performance with Blender. As you can see, the 2400G runs almost neck to neck with the Ryzen 5 1500X while costing less. Moving on to Handbrake, and the 2400G continues to offer performance that's similar to the 1500X, but the 2200G starts falling behind the 1300X. Okay, moment of truth. How do these APUs play well with gaming? Well, as you can see, they're a hell of a lot better than the integrated solution from Intel. 3D Mark Cloudgate and Skydiver perform really well on the 2400G with Vega 11 graphics and the 2200G with Vega 8. It's obviously not going to match GTX 1050 performance, but that shouldn't disappoint you. Take Dota 2 for instance. At 1080p set to medium preset, the 2400G with Vega 11 graphics dishes out well over 60 frames per second, while the 2200G with slightly lower compute units isn't too shy from the 60 frames per second mark. Wolfenstein at 1080p set to medium also does a pretty good job on both APUs, averaging around 40 frames per second and 33 frames per second respectively. Here's a quick look at Civilization 6, very respectable performance at 1080p set to low settings. Now in the past, integrated graphics solutions have benefited immensely from higher memory speeds, so we decided to apply an XMP profile of 3200 MHz. Going anywhere above this range could result in BSODs unless timings loosened, so we remained here at 1440, 1432. And guys, check this out. We're looking at a 12 to 18% frame rate improvement in titles like Civilization 6, Doom, and Overwatch, and that certainly isn't something to sneeze at. Our next step was to address the core frequencies of the Ryzen 5 2400G's GPU itself, because overclocking the integrated graphics contributes to the overall overclock of the entire processor. Unfortunately, our 2200G had some issues with stability when overclocking the integrated Vega graphics, so that isn't going to be in these charts. With the 2400G, it wasn't really an easy thing overclocking due to the terrible beta BIOS on the MSI B350 motherboard, but AMD's Ryzen Master software took some of that stress away, and we ended up with a constant 1438 MHz, which was the maximum that could be achieved without black screening during game testing or applying excess voltage. As you can see, the overall performance did indeed improve, but nothing like it did with faster memory. It could be that memory speeds were once again the culprit and ended up limiting GPU throughput, or this could have been just a law of diminishing returns. Either way, frame rates were certainly impressive for an integrated graphics solution. Also, don't forget about power consumption as well. Overclocking these APUs contributes to the power, current, and thermal limit of the processor, and due to that, the integrated graphics chip will be capped at lower than expected limits many times. As for cooling these chips, the stock cooler that comes with these APUs do a pretty good job keeping temperatures under control while overclocking, but we recommend something like the Noctua NHL9 series since it's quieter and performs really well when compared to stock solutions. So, can these APUs really play 1080p games at a lower price point? The answer is yes. Absolutely, but there are some limitations with the Ryzen 5 2400G and the Ryzen 3 2200G, especially with the way how they rely on memory frequencies. For example, at stock settings, both APUs do a pretty good job yielding comfortable frame rates, especially in titles like Dota 2, CSGO, Civilization 6. Vega 11 and Vega 8 does not have a problem firing through those titles, provided that you do some image adjustments. But if you are interested in slightly demanding titles like Doom, Overwatch, Wolfenstein, Destiny 2, overclocking the memory can significantly increase the performance. And we've seen that by the results. Not to mention, even bumping up the core speed on the IGP contributed to that as well. Now, investing in a dual channel 3200 MHz memory kit might sound like a good idea, but from a price to performance ratio, it just doesn't make any sense pairing it up with a Raven Ridge APU, because you'd be paying a lot more for the RAM with the combined costs of the APU and a motherboard, because DRAM pricing, it's a thing. It's a thing in 2018. Personally, I think Raven Ridge is an excellent solution for people who are looking to build their systems by steps. So for example, they can pick one of these APUs and start gaming or get away with some light 1080p gaming. And if they want to increase their performance, they can obviously add a discrete GPU, given that prices normalize, given how the current cryptocurrency market is and how it has affected the pricing on GPUs. I think Raven Ridge might be a temporary solution if you consider it from that perspective. But if you are looking to also build your very first computer, and if you are on a tight budget, this is definitely a great option, because you really don't have to invest on a discrete GPU. You can definitely just start gaming on it right away with your CPU, memory, and motherboard, and of course the rest of the components apart from a discrete graphics card. I do have to mention that there are some limitations with this platform, especially with I/O. So for example, you can't throw in two NVMe SSDs, put them in RAID, or go through quad or dual channel SLI setups. That just doesn't make any sense with these Raven Ridge APUs. And you've seen that with the I/O list that I talked about earlier in the video. So at the end of the day, there are two questions that needs to be answered. One, are these APUs really worth their price? Two, is it really worth upgrading from a 1500X or 1300X? Let me answer question one. I think if you are looking to build your very first gaming computer, you should definitely consider these new Raven Ridge APUs. And B, to answer your second question, you should probably not consider upgrading from a 1500X to the 2400G or even the 2200G coming from a 1300X, because the performance difference isn't that drastic. But what I'm really excited about is the way how OEM manufacturers are going to implement these APUs on their products. For example, all-in-one desktop systems and portable laptops, because that would be an interesting, I think that would be an interesting way to approach gaming, or mainstream gaming, I would say, at a relatively affordable price point. So what do you guys think about Raven Ridge APU, specifically the 2400G and the 2200G? Let me know in the comments down below. I'm Ibar with HardwareCanucks. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.